In this lesson, I will be going over some of the general concepts of working inside desktop computers and laptop computers and how they differ and how you can take them apart, put them back together, as well as just doing general maintenance or work inside those computers. Remember, there are special considerations as an IT technician when supporting laptop computers that are different than those supporting the different chassis styles of desktop computers. But as an IT technician, you should know how to take a computer apart and put it back together again. Now, when it comes to laptops, there are many different designs in the laptop cases, so they're not all going to be the same. You may have to take off everything completely from the top. You may have to take off the bottom that protects the underneath, as well as remove the bezel and keyboard and everything from the top to do simple tasks such as replacing RAM. First and foremost, though, what you should always remember is to keep safety first. You should always follow all your safety precautions that you learn about, and as you read, whenever you're reading about your components from your manufacturer documentation, follow those safety guidelines. They're in there for a reason. Whether you're putting on your ground strap for a desktop or a laptop, make sure you're grounded before working on these electronic components. You want to make sure that you avoid any damage to yourself as well as the components of the computer that you're working on. I can't emphasize enough, make sure that you have completely removed the power from like a desktop, that you've unplugged it and then held the power button for a few seconds to make sure that you get rid of any residual energy that's stored in there from the power supply, as well as making sure that you take the battery out of the laptop and making sure that you hold down the power button on that as well. Before you ever get to the point where you're working on the inside of a computer, though, always make sure to back up all important data just in case something happens. It's a really bad day when you have to let the customer know all their information has been lost because you didn't do the simple step of backing up all of that important data. Okay, so we've backed up the data. We've made sure that there's no residual power that's going to affect us. We make sure we're grounded. What's next? Let's talk about that disassembly and assembly of the overall process for computers, whether it be laptops, desktops. There are some general procedures that you will follow. You just need to adjust accordingly when you work with the laptops. The first step, of course, besides once you're ready to disassemble, is to plan and organize your work accordingly. Make sure you take some notes or you have a step-by-step procedure ready if you've never done this before. Make sure you remove any type of jewelry that you might have that could get caught on something in the computer. This may seem silly, but I have seen people snag like a bracelet or a necklace as they're working on one and either cause harm to themselves or break that important jewelry. When you're working on desktops and laptops and you're disassembling, make sure you keep all your small parts in one place, whether it be with a small little plastic case for holding screws, or if you've got like a big piece of white paper that's laid down to lay parts on so you can write on there and label them. Whatever practice you find best for you, just make sure that you are organized. I do find it helpful, especially with laptops, but especially those that are starting out, make sure that you take pictures or video of your disassembly process so that when you go to the assemble process, things go much smoother. As always, when you are working with the board chips or your RAM, make sure you don't touch the board chips. Don't try to be careful, and the best practice is not to use a magnetized screwdriver, but we find that most of us use a magnetized screwdriver because that's what we have handy, or we don't think about it, or we know that we're going to drop some screws and we want to be able to easily pick them up. Even though if you have your proper IT technician toolkit, you have some small grabbers that you can use to retract those. Unfortunately, a lot of people do use magnetic screwdrivers. Make sure that you don't put any fingerprints on the edge connectors, such as on the end of the RAM, and because that can cause corrosion later on, which leads to more expensive repair costs. Working inside a desktop computer, this is another emphasis on safety. It is very easy to find sharp edges on your desktop. You may not realize that, and lots of cuts occur from the sharp edges on the chassis. Okay, now that you've done that, you're ready to move on to step 2, and step 2 is to open the computer case and examine everything that's in there. Make sure that, as I said, you have verified ever before getting to this point that you have definitely removed all power connections and that you're ready. Now that you're ready for this, simply based on whatever style of chassis you're working with, remove the case cover, whether there's a screw or multiple screws that are holding this, or if it's a simple latch system. Make sure to remove the case cover, set it to the side so that it's out of your way, away from your feet. Make sure it's not sitting on any type of carpet so that it gets that static electricity. But make sure it's nearby for when you go back to the assembly process. If you have not done so, at this point definitely clip on your ESD strap to the side of the chassis to ground yourself. And once again, ESD does stand for electrostatic discharge, and you want to make sure you avoid that. If you've ever walked through carpet on with socks on, then you touch the metal surface and you get that spark, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to ESD. Alright, so make sure that you follow all the cables from the motherboard to the component to know the purpose of each of the cables that are inside there. Now when you're disassembling and you're taking those cables apart, here's a good reason why taking pictures can be very helpful, so that you make sure you put your SATA cables close by for when you're putting your let's say your optical drives back in or your storage device back in. You know that your SATA drive goes with those components. Making sure that you take pictures or notes for all of your electrical connections from your power supply unit, where they go. This is very helpful as well. Now that you're inside and you've looked things over and you've made some good notes as you've examined the system, you're ready to move on to step 3, and that's removing any available expansion cards that may have been inserted into the motherboard to expand the capabilities of the system. Here you might need to look at the expansion slot covers that you'll need to take screws out of, or how to properly remove your card out so that it doesn't interfere with any of the other cards. You also need to make sure you're keeping track once again of all your cable connections here, so that when you go to put everything back together, let's say you have a video card that takes power to a power connector from the card to the motherboard for additional power. You want to make sure that you take very good notes of this. So when you are taking those little screws out, if you've got locking tabs, whatever the case may be, just make sure you have good notes for when you go back to put everything back in. Once you've gotten any of your expansion cards, whether it be video cards or you've got, let's say, some HDMI expansion ports that you've used through a card, let's say maybe a PCIe Express slot, make sure you have those put aside and note how they were inserted, so that maybe there is a issue with airflow or bumping of the expansion cards, so that you don't go back and put those in incorrectly and cause yourself to have overheating issues. Make sure you have plenty of space between your expansion cards. Now ready to move on to step 4, and that's to remove the motherboard, your power supply, and your storage drives. You will hear people say hard drives, but I tend not to use that because of the movement, to move away from the spinning disk hard drives that are slower, fail more due to the moving parts, to the movement of having solid state drives. And so make sure that when you go to take these out, have a good order and make sure you have everything set aside properly so that you know where everything goes back in. Taking out your storage drive from your case, this could be as simple as just taking out a couple screws. You may have locking tab that squeeze together and then you can pull out the drive. Just make sure you've removed the power and data cables from them before moving the storage drive out into the side. If you've kept your anti-static bags, make sure to put your storage drives and your expansion cards into those anti-static bags for safe holding until you're ready to put them back in. When all of your power connections have been disconnected from the devices, the optical drives, the storage drives, the motherboard, make sure to look for any type of screws that attach the power supply to your computer case. Make sure not to remove any of the screws though that hold the power supply housing together. You don't want to take the housing apart. You just want to take those screws that secure the power supply to the chassis, take those out, and then you can slide out the power supply. So make sure to be careful with that. And once you have all of your optical drives, storage drives, and your power supply removed, make sure you have anything like RAM. I find it a best practice to take the RAM out before removing the motherboard. Some may disagree with that. Why take something out if you don't need to? I just like to be safe. So once you're ready to take out the motherboard, make sure that you look at how that is attached before just grabbing it and trying to lift it up. Now when it comes to removing your motherboard from your case, make sure all of your cables have been removed, obviously, such as the cables for the front panel connector. Sometimes people forget to disconnect those, but make sure you take good note of that. You also need to make sure, what I find best is make sure to use the documentation that came with that computer or that motherboard specifically, or any type of step-by-step instructions you can find from the manufacturer. One of the things that you should definitely take note of is the spacers, or what we more properly call the standoffs, that are underneath the motherboard that keep the motherboard from making any type of contact with the metal case. This is what causes short-circuiting of your motherboard. Sometimes people will forget to put all of the standoffs, or even any of the standoffs, back in place under the motherboard, and then put the screws through the motherboard into those standoffs. And this is where they find out, once you put that power back onto the system, that motherboard's making contact with the metal surface, and then we have short-circuiting that occurs. Remember, the motherboard is the largest circuit board of your PC, or the largest circuit of the PC. Once you've done that, and you've taken your motherboard out, now you have an empty chassis. If you're working with laptops, you probably find that you have a lot more screws sitting around, and that you need to make sure that when you're removing that motherboard, you're very careful, because of the way that the integrated ports on your laptop go into that laptop case very specifically. So when you're ordering a motherboard for a laptop, it is very key to make sure you have the correct motherboard for the case of your laptop. Otherwise, you may get one that comes in and it doesn't have the right angles that need to be cut on the motherboard. So you've run into not only lost time and money, but having to explain that to the customer that you did not order the correct part. And then step 5, of course, is whether you're replacing parts or if you were just doing this for fun, it's time to reassemble. And reassembling is pretty simple process. Sometimes this is where people mess up and they're like, oh, they have some spare parts left over. Don't be that person to have any spare parts. Some people differ on their opinion about the optimal order in which components should be installed into the case. Some will say that the power supply needs to go in first, then your drives, then your motherboard, and then cards. This may differ depending on the case that's involved. Just make sure that your motherboard lines up correctly with the input-output shield in the back of a computer case. This is very critical to make sure that everything lines up so that when you have everything locked into place, it works correctly. You don't want to have your motherboard in there incorrectly at all. Make sure that you connect all of your power cables back into the motherboard and the different devices such as your storage drives. Make sure that you're using the correct power connector, as you will find that some motherboards or some power supplies may have more than one type of power connector, especially if you're replacing the power supply unit. Typically you'll find in your computer cases that you will be using the P1 power connector for your main power for your motherboard, and most likely a 4-pin auxiliary connector that's going to provide power for your processor. Make sure, especially as you're getting ready for your A+ exam, that you can correctly identify the 6-pin or 8-pin PCIe power connectors, as well as Molex and your SATA power connectors. You will find that your SATA power connector and your data connector look similar. Just remember that the 15-pin is the power connector for SATA devices. Now let's talk about some additional notes. These are just some notes I want to throw out there for some special considerations when you are thinking about disassembling or taking parts out of your PC and replacing them. One of the main factors to consider is the original equipment warranty from the manufacturer. If your device is under warranty, don't touch it. Take full advantage of that warranty. You may find that the original equipment manufacturer's warranty will just replace the PC or the part. There could be service manuals and diagnostic software that the manufacturer has to help you through that. Let's say it's something that they consider a FRU, a field replaceable unit, and they can help you through that, such as with online or phone support. Make sure you take advantage of that. The warranties can be a big deal, especially with working with laptops. So always check to see if your device, especially the laptop, is under warranty before ever servicing it. Contact technical support. Give them the information that they'll need to know, such as like the model and serial number. Of course, you'll need to provide your information, and maybe even the purchaser name and phone number if you're working on someone else's, and take advantage of the options you may have to you. Whether you can ship it to an authorized service center where they will do the work, maybe they will provide on-site assistance, or maybe it's, as I mentioned earlier, it is some phone or online chat assistance that is available to you. The next additional note I want to talk about is service manuals. Service manuals can definitely save you time and heartache. These are going to enable you to not have to start from scratch or guess, especially on laptops when you're disassembling them. Service manuals, whether they are digital or paper, can be very helpful tools. This is why some of us lean towards certain manufacturers of laptops because of the great documentation or step-by-step service documents that they create to help you. So make sure you go to the manufacturer's website, check for the manufacturer's documentation. You will find out maybe your support or fax pages are very helpful here. There are also some third-party websites you may want to check out to try to get information, especially if you've got like an older machine you can't find any type of documentation on the manufacturer's website. Another key point here with service manuals is the basic service maintenance tasks that you should perform to keep your system running at an optimized level. Not everyone blows out their machines. Not everyone makes sure that their exhaust fan propellers are clean. These are just some of the things that you might find in your maintenance tasks listed based on the service manual that comes with the machine or is downloadable from the manufacturer's website. You can find a lot of information from different forums as well as tutorial videos such as this one. You can find that you can get a lot of information, especially let's say you have a system and you're considering a certain video card upgrade. You could find information on forums from people that have performed the installation. If there were any special tasks they needed to make, such as making sure to disable and re-enable in your settings. You want to make sure that you go in and disable the integrated video card and then enable the expansion video card that you've placed in, or else you may turn on your system and realize, oh, I don't see a difference here. What good was it for me to spend that money and time to put in that new video card, and then you find out, oh, you didn't disable the onboard or the integrated. So make sure you check out forums and videos before making any changes like that. There are lots of diagnostic tools that are out there, like PC Doctor. Some of your manufacturers will have different type of diagnostic software that they provide to you for your systems. Printers are a great one for this because you'll find out a lot of like HP and them will have great diagnostic tools for troubleshooting your printers. So check your manufacturer's website to see if they have any type of diagnostic software, because you might do an install and find out, oh, something's not working right. They may have the tool already for you to help troubleshoot that in a much easier way. You might even see that some manufacturers are still putting out optical media such as CDs or DVDs that have these the software for diagnostic on them. Well, that's it for